All right, we come to this now. South Africa was facing an economic crisis even before the COVID-19 pandemic, and strategies like the National Development and the Economic Recovery plans were already in place. But how will a prolonged COVID-19 depression affect these plans? The Human Science Research Council has held a webinar looking into this. So let's discuss what came up of the council's, whether with the council's Peter Jacobs. Mr. Jacobs, thank you so much for your time. This is literally on everyone's lips. If you're a business owner, if you are a consumer, if you are just an ordinary citizen of this country, you're quite worried about the effects of, COVID in the long term, with regards to our economy. What came out of the webinar just in terms of how many years or the timelines we're looking at here?
Good morning to yourself and to the listeners. The webinar, maybe I should say one or two things about the webinar itself. It's part of a whole series of webinars that we're organizing as the HSRC to facilitate and promote the societal dialogue on macroeconomic policy, because we feel that it should not be confined to one or two academics, and there should be a very broad societal debate. Yesterday's webinar or seminar was the first in two for the year. This is the first one before our budget statement next week. It falls between SONA and the budget statement. Because it's a very important moment to reflect on macroeconomic policy. And there is another one planned for October, which will take place just before the medium-term budget policy statement that the finance minister will deliver in October. There will be another eminent speaker that we will host in the middle of the year, and this will continue over the next 3 years. In yesterday's dialogue, we had really great speakers, and we've planned it in a way to begin a more careful reflection on what's going to happen beyond COVID-19. Now, it's very difficult to start talking about beyond COVID-19 given the uncertainties around mutation. So we don't know how many mutations there are going to be and how the mutations will impact, how fast they will spread. But from a macroeconomic perspective, if we look back over the last couple of years, it's very clear that we've been in economic trouble, and the COVID crisis or pandemic has worsened the situation, not only for businesses, but particularly for the unemployed, which links in directly with the HSRC's strategic goals of focusing on inequality, poverty, and unemployment. So the dialogue yesterday had eminent speakers, Professor Siraj Mohammed, Professor Alexis Habremian, and Dr. Gilad Isaacs, and they made presentations on different aspects of the crisis, the extent of the crisis in South Africa,
right,
and what's new on the policy agenda.
And let's talk about that, because I suppose that's what South Africans would like to know in terms of what came out, in case they hadn't had the opportunity to watch the webinar, Mr. Jacob. So let's talk about, policy options rather existing for, sustainable and equitable macroeconomic reconstruction and recovery. What has been discussed? Briefly, please.
What we discussed quite a lot of the ideas around the approaches being utilized in the main government departments, specifically National Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank, as well as the National Planning Commission. And the National Development Plan and the big documents such as the Reconstruction and Recovery Program, these documents, according to most of the speakers, they lack the kind of macroeconomic approaches that have been utilized very, very actively in previous recessions. And that was the first take-home point. And we don't understand why previous experiences have simply been ignored. And there are a lot of these previous experiences specifically focusing on stimulus packages. And we think from the documents yesterday presented that the government has not been too ambitious on a pro-poor, pro-unemployment-linked policies in macroeconomic policy. That was the first and biggest take-home message from yesterday's webinar.
All right, then we'll leave it there. But thank you so much for joining us and briefing us about the webinar. That is Mr. Peter Jacobs from the HSRC.